Hello everybody, my name is Gary Davis and I am a Senior Solutions Engineer and Technical Specialist with the Media and Entertainment Group. Today we're going to be taking a look at the feature highlights of Autodesk 3ds Max 2012 for entertainment customers. So as the slide indicates, we're going to be taking a look at primarily 3ds Max 2012 today and focusing on the new key features and benefits of this release. Due to time constraints, we're not going to be able to hit every single one of these. However, I did want to give you a nice list of kind of the bullet points of the highlights. There's certainly more to this list, but just these are the major advancements with the 2012 release. Specifically, the Nitrous Accelerated Graphics Core is a big one that impacts everybody using 3ds Max. It doesn't matter if you're a game developer or an architect or a visual effects artist or doing motion graphics. This is one that affects everybody because it's an entire rewrite of the viewport technology, and we're going to see some of that in a short bit. Stylistic rendering is for non-photorealism. Substance maps is a new type of texture map that's similar to procedural maps. However, there's some little bits of differences that we'll be taking a look at. M-Rigids is the first implementation of this new system for doing physics called Mass Effects, and the phase one of this is for doing rigid body dynamics, as we'll take a look at. Irae is a new rendering engine that's included with the base package of 3ds Max and is getting a lot of attention for doing realistic renderings. The single-step suites Interop is something that we'll won't be taking a look at too much today, but we will be hearing a little bit more about that shortly with a couple of slides. Enhanced UVW unwrapping is a great new feature in Max for anybody doing texture mapping of things that are sort of fall outside of the category of planar, cylindrical, spherical, and so on. So if you're doing organic models such as characters, this will help you. Vector displacement map is something that relates very specifically to Mudbox and back to the single-step suites Interop. Paint, Deform, and Transform brushes is just more advancements in the graphite modeling toolbars, or the ribbon as you might be hearing it called elsewhere. And also there's new additions and extensions, additional tools added to the viewport canvas. So these are both two tool sets that have existed in previous releases of Max, but they keep getting new tools added on to them as we move along through the history of the product. Also included with 3ds Max are a couple of other applications that I wanted to mention. Briefly, 3ds Max Composite is a full paint and compositing application. You can see here, I won't read every single bullet point in here, but if you're familiar with something like Photoshop or After Effects, this is going to kind of combine those workflows into a node-based or layer-based compositing application with paint. It's got color correction. You can work full floating point, high dynamic range. It's a fantastic tool to augment any 3ds Max artist that is doing rendering. Moving along, 3ds Max also includes Matchmover 2012 for subscription customers, and this is a camera match moving application, hence the name Matchmover, that actually will help you extract real-world camera information from video and then get that camera information as position, rotation, and scale information inside of 3ds Max. The FBX file format links a lot of these applications together, and Matchmover, as well as 3ds Max and Composite, can also take advantage of these cameras. Moving along, 3ds Max 2012 also ships with a third-party company called Craft Animations, and they have a set of tools called the Director tool set, which you can see down here includes Observer Cam, Humanizer Cam, Multi-State Cam, and Soft Motion Cam. So these are real-world ways of getting real-world camera movement into your scene very easily. And then also the highlights of the applications, or the plugins rather, that ship with 2012 release of 3ds Max include a pre-rigged vehicle and support for a four-wheeled vehicle. You can also find out more information about this at craftanimations.com and to further exploit this tool set within 3ds Max. Now, before I move on into the actual product demonstration of 3ds Max, I wanted to also briefly talk about the entertainment creation suites that are now available from Autodesk. This is something similar to the likes of Adobe or Microsoft, and Autodesk is following suit, where you can get a lot of value into a suite. So we have two flavors of the suite. We have the standard suite, which, as I said, Max includes now Composite and Matchmover and the Craft Animation tools. Image Modeler is available to subscription customers. Now, in addition, when you buy the suite, you have the option to go with the standard or premium suite, and both of them include Motion Builder and Mudbox, which we'll get into in a moment. But then when you move up to the premium suite, it includes all of that and the addition of Softimage. So you have a lot of different options, and if you're already a 3ds Max customer, upgrading to either of these suites is surprisingly inexpensive. So I would talk to your reseller about that option. Now, just briefly, this isn't going to be a demonstration of Mudbox, Motion Builder, or Softimage, but I just wanted to highlight and let you see here some of the key features and benefits of each of these applications. Some real highlights here that I see are UV-less painting, which is support for PTEX, and also paint optimizations for working with really high resolution models. And then you're going to see a common thread here of this single step suites interop. That just basically means any of these packages can one click from within that application and create a live link into the other package. So for example, in 3ds Max, I can have a teapot selected, click a button, send that teapot over to Mudbox, sculpt on it, and with a single click of a button have that model sent back. So this interop is something that's very big. It's not just bundling a bunch of software together at a discount when we talk about the suites. The Autodesk Media and Entertainment suites, and all of the suites for that matter at Autodesk, really start to introduce workflows where the line between these applications is starting to gray out a little bit, and you can kind of think of the whole suite as a pipeline in a box. Motion Builder, key benefits from the 2012 release here include, once again, single step interop, F-curve editor enhancements that sort of unify the look and feel of 3ds Max, Maya, Motion Builder, and Softimage, all to have the same function curve editor. And moving along here, lastly, we've got Softimage, which is a phenomenal product for doing procedural particle systems using ICE, which stands for Interactive Creative Environment. And then it's also got a single step interop, vector displacement map support, and interestingly, 3ds Max and Maya cache support. So this is going to be an option for those of you doing sort of maybe high-end visual effects or something like that, and you want a node-based modeling and particle system. You could look to Softimage to one click over from Max, do your work in Softimage, and then send that data back to Max for materials, lighting, and rendering. So with that, I'll get started into the product demonstration of the new feature highlights of 3ds Max 2012. So the first aspect I'm going to show about these nitrous viewports is just the realism that you can get, and there's actually a few new types of view modes up here. Right here you can see realistic, and as I just orbit around my character and kind of zoom in, you can see that there's a sort of a fine grain that gets refined. This is called adaptive degradation, and you'll see that it just sort of procedurally or just continually draws in the shading there, and that's going to add just quite literally the realism of screen space ambient occlusion in your view. Another thing about these viewports isn't just the realism of things like soft shadows and indirect illumination and ambient occlusion and so on, but you can drop down to just the shaded view, which is something you're used to in previous releases. And if I just go ahead and select this entire model, I'm going to just shift copy this. Right now I'm upwards at about 3 million polygons, and if I just copy this guy a couple of times, let's say maybe 3 times, what's going to happen right now is first it's going to take a second and cache this onto the video card. I'm using a QuadroFX 3800M on a laptop at the moment, but so it's a pretty good, it's a high-end laptop, but a very professional video card, QuadroFX. Now you can see here I'm getting about 20 frames per second with 10 million polygons in the scene, and that's going to be a significant improvement over previous releases of the software. So again, the capture software might not be showing this quite as fluid as I'm seeing it live, but I'm maintaining about 20 frames per second with 10 million polygons. And another interesting thing about this performance is that it doesn't just work at the object level. If I go into this model here and let's say convert this to a editable polygon, the reason I'm going to do that is to get to this nice graphite modeling tools. Let's go ahead and open up the graphite modeling ribbon, and I'm just going to use one of these as an example. But what's nice about this these new display modes is that they actually work both at the object level as well as the sub-object level. So just to use maybe this freeform tool of shifting, if I can just move this around, you can see that I'm really easily able to modify and distort geometry. And if I exit out of there, you can see that I'm still working at the sub-object mode, but I still have that high frame rate. In fact, I'm getting over 30 frames per second in sub-object mode. So a significant impact whether you're working on one viewport or all your viewports. And just to mention that with the 2012 release of 3ds Max, the viewports are now multi-threaded. So obviously these 4 views in past releases were all hitting the main thread. Now they're multi-threaded, as well as taking advantage of the GPU and or CPU. So significant improvement with the nitrous viewports. In this next scene, you can also see that the acceleration is really phenomenal in shaded view. However, if I switch back to this new realistic mode, one of the things that you're going to see is this really nice lighting in the viewport. And I'll draw your attention to a couple of features here. Once again, as I orbit around and zoom the camera, you're going to see what that progressive refinement continually sort of start to draw in when I release the mouse. I'll also point your attention to these soft shadows, which are accurately showing sort of the penumbra or the cone of the lighting in the scene. And if I just bring up a hidden selection set here and show the street lights, something else that you could do, and let me actually just go into a scene state here and show my lights. Something else you can do is very easily do lighting analysis by moving your lights around and seeing that directly in the viewport. Now this isn't the same lighting analysis that an architect would maybe need, but what this is going to be able to allow you to do is see your lights directly in the view. And another important fact with the 2012 release and these nitrous viewports is that you're no longer limited to 8 lights in the view. In this case, this scene I believe has over a dozen lights in it, but you can see directly in the viewport you're going to be getting that phenomenal fidelity and adaptive degradation slowly drawing in there to get your final result. So what's great about this nitrous viewport is that it's also tied to a rendering engine called Quicksilver. But before I get to that, I'll show you a couple of new view modes here, or draw modes, in addition to the realistic. And obviously we have the old school ones like wireframe. Those aren't going to go anywhere. But there's a whole new category here called stylized. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but let's take, for example, technical or technical illustration. These are going to be doing non-photorealistic types of drawing, but directly in the viewport. So you're not looking at a rendering right now. I haven't changed any shaders in my scene, but you can see that as I orbit around, we're getting a very cartoon sort of non-realistic, or in this case, technical look. I can change this out to a couple more. Maybe let's go to colored pencil. In the case of colored pencil, there's a very neat effect that it actually has a screen overlay of something almost like a pencil illustration that, as you can see here. Now, while I'm showing you these different looks, some food for thought here is that you're not necessarily going to be using these for final renders, although you certainly could. But obviously, many times during the course of a production, these types of non-photorealistic renderers are good for doing things like tests of an object or tests of an animation, and you're not going to confuse your customer with inaccurate or incomplete materials or renders that took longer, for example, like Irae or Irae or something like that. So again, these different types of looks are right under here under stylized, and let's just do one more here of ink so you can get kind of a black and white drawing look. And then what you can ultimately do is bring up your render dialog and actually opt to use the Quicksilver hardware renderer. So if I jump over here to assign renderer and go into Quicksilver, here you can see that we have the same choices for doing realistic views as we saw earlier with the MechMan model, or you can come down and use these non-photorealistic view displays. Now, a little tip and trick with this, and in closing on the non-photorealistic part, when you get your 3ds Max 2012 install CD, check in the extras folder or for the examples, and you can see that there's a great script in there that our good friend Bobo wrote. And what this allows you to do is either adjust the views, Quicksilver, or both. So in this case, I could say, let's have both my renderer and my viewports go to colored ink, for example. And this will also allow you to do things like adjust the line density and the thickness and so on. So a lot of excitement going on in the 2012 release of the viewports, both with the Quicksilver hardware renderer as well as the nitrous acceleration of everything that you do in the viewports. The next feature I'd like to discuss is called substance textures or substance maps. And here you can see I've got a very basic scene with some simple primitives. This cube over here has a tile, as the text indicates, of 1 by 1. This ground plane has a tile of 2 by 2, as you can see with these logos that are repeating. And then this torus knot has actually 8 by 1, so there's 8 UV tiles going along the length of this knot. So it's the same material applied to all of these, and that's what I'm going to use to kind of show how substances work. Now, what we call substances are smart textures, and as you can see here, these are the ones that ship with 3ds Max 2012 out of the box. And you can think of these kind of like procedural textures, and you'll understand why in a second, but as opposed to just being a JPEG or a Targa file on the hard drive like a standard texture map might be, these have a lot of parametric values which make them much more like a procedural texture. However, the primary difference is that at render time, these are rasterized or turn into bitmaps basically on the video card. Now, the way that this works is the Substance engine was licensed by a company called Allegorithmic, and if we bring up their website briefly, you can see here that they do in fact have, it is a third party, and they do in fact have other products that you can get. Namely, one is called Substance Designer, which if you're interested in finding out more about these substances, I would encourage you to check out the Allegorithmic website and check out Substance Designer. Now, this is not an Autodesk product, and this is a product that you do have to pay for, but not to get started with using substances right out of the box with 3ds Max. So essentially what we did was we licensed the technology and the engine that our Allegorithmic makes, and we put 80 free substance maps included with 3ds Max. Now, there's additional places you can go to their website, and this is kind of a neat little utility where I can adjust these parametric values and even hit like a generate a random seed for this one. Maybe let's go to one that was a little more obvious. And I can do things like adjust the shape, and this is going to give you the ability to see what substances look like before you actually buy them. And you can see here these prices are very affordable, you know, $5, $15, and just keep in mind that when you do pay for these substances, you're not buying just one texture map, you're buying a version of these. Another place that you can get these is our good friends over at TurboSquid, and you can see that under substances here there's a lot of different things. There's tutorials, there's also some videos that you can look at, and one that I'd also encourage you to check out is a new product that they have that they offer to a discount to 3ds Max customers called Bitmap to Material. But that's a little bit outside of the scope of this demonstration today. What I'm going to do right now is open up the standard material editor or the compact material editor and just start showing you how these substances work. So in this case it's a bitmap file that I've got, just plain old bitmap on the hard drive. If I just select everything in my scene and apply this standard material right here, you can see that it does in fact tile very nicely. That's a seamless texture map that goes through here. So what we've done, keeping it very simple here, we're using a standard old school shader, and in the diffuse map slot what we're using is, instead of a bitmap or something like a noise pattern, we're using a substance map. So in the output selector here, what you could do is come up into the material map browser and type in SUB into the search field, and that's where you're going to get this substance map. Now, just by loading a substance map, what you've done is actually loaded the engine into that map slot. And then what you've got to do, one more step, is to choose a source map. Now, if I drill down here one more level, you can see that we've got pretty standard UV tiling and so on. But in the case of this map, which is a .sbsar, or substance texture, this one is called crumpled paper. Now, down here, I'll jump down a little bit. You can see that I've got things like the random seed, and I can adjust things like how much crumple is in the material itself, and you can see that happening directly in the view. I can also adjust how much dirt there is. Let's maybe make this really dirty, and let's even change the paper color to something drastic like maybe a greenish hue. So again, you can see all that directly in the nitrous viewports, and as I exit out of there, you can see that we've got our green paper tiled. Now, some more interesting things about the way substance textures work. Up at the global substance settings here, you can see that I can define a global resolution, and in this case it's 1024 by 1024, and I'm telling it to use 512 by 512, or half that resolution, in the actual viewport on the video card. But remember that this is a global substance settings for every single substance maps that you use in your scene. What I can also do is come down here to texture size and see that right now this local map, or this green paper that I've created, is using relative resolution to the global at 1:1. So that means I can define a global resolution at 1024, but that doesn't mean that I'm locked into that resolution for each of these substances. And you can see here I can go to an extreme fraction or multiplier of that base texture. So I like to use 1024 as my base texture. I can kind of keep that in the back of my head, and then case by case I can adjust these substance maps accordingly. Now I'll jump ahead to another one right here. I've got already installed. You can see I'm just going to select everything in my scene. This one does not ship with 3ds Max, but I wanted to show you this one because it has some interesting aspects, including an animatable value. And again, just to remind you that you can get hundreds of these substance, if not thousands of them by now, available at either Allegorithmic's website or TurboSquid. Now here you can see I'm just going to take one value and adjust this door opening, and obviously you can see we've got sort of a sci-fi door opening. But a lot of these values are animatable. So again, don't think of these just as Targa files or JPEGs or something like that. Really think of these as building blocks for an entire scene. This next example I'm going to get a little bit more tricky, and I'm going to show you an example of a map that I mentioned just briefly a second ago. What I'm doing here is if I go into the substance texture for this, what we've actually got is a substance called Bitmap to Material, and this is an optional third-party add-on, and just to be clear about that, this is not part of the base package of 3ds Max. But if I switch out into our Slate Material Editor, what you're going to see here is that a substance map has several different output types. So instead of just being a bitmap that only does one thing, you can have the bump map go out into another one. So I'm getting a little bit tricky here with this substance. This particular map type has an input. So this one called Bitmap to Material has an input that you can actually feed a regular old Targa or JPEG or other bitmap type off the hard drive. And then what you get is, if I just move this over to the way for some screen real estate, what you have is the ability to actually tile this and use different types of tiling to offset the seam. So you can see here I've got different values or different ways I'll do splat, and notice in the viewport that there is in fact no obvious tiling going on. Another interesting thing about this, if I bring back our Slate Material Editor, you can see that we've got, let me just zoom in here a little bit, we've got all these different output types coming off of one bitmap. So in addition to just using a bitmap as a diffuse map, this bitmap to substance will give you the option to output specular, normal maps, bump maps, displacement maps, and even ambient occlusion, which you can see here. So if I expand this dialog, all these maps are being generated by that one single map type called bitmap to texture. So substance maps are going to be a great way to alleviate the worry of creating complex textures in your scene. And with the 2012 release is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of room for growth with these substances. Mass FX is based off the PhysX engine from NVIDIA and can now be accessed right out of the box in Max 2012 by right-clicking on an empty area of the toolbar at the top and bringing up the Mass FX toolbar itself. Now the first phase of this in Max 2012 is M-Rigid, rigid body dynamics, but as you know, the NVIDIA PhysX engine is capable of more than that, so you can consider this a phase one of a multi-phase initiative as part of Max's Excalibur initiative. What I'm going to do right now is come to a selection set and access all of these crate objects, and before I get into the simulation, I just want to show you that there is no animation in this. As I scrub the timeline, nothing's been keyframed in this scene quite yet. So with these crates selected, what we can do is come up here and choose what type of rigid body they're going to be in. In this case, I'll say that these are dynamic rigid bodies. And what that did was applied a modifier to every single one of these. If you look in the modifier stack for just one of these crate elements, you have a new modifier called the Mass FX rigid body. And you can see that there's a lot of attributes for things like density, mass, static friction, dynamic friction, bounciness, and so on. And you can also here define the hull object that will be placed around the object, so that when you run the simulation, and I can do that just by hitting play on the simulation bar, now you're going to see that the Mass FX engine is taking over and actually doing this directly in the viewport and in real time. Now obviously our crates are falling through the ground, and that's not what we want. So what I'm going to do is come up to another selection set that I did ahead of time for rails and road. Now these aren't going to be calculated by the physics engine, but we want to make them the physics engine be aware of them. So what we're going to do is make these selected objects as static rigid bodies. So those won't move around in the scene, but they will be seen by the simulation. So now as I hit play, once again directly in the viewport, you're seeing these boxes falling to the ground, but now they're actually impacting the ground and sort of landing in a pile. So let's continue our scene here. What I can do is I'm going to come over and unhide everything in my scene here. This is happening off screen. Sorry about that, but I'm just unhiding everything in the into the scene. And what we've got here, you can see I've got a semi-truck that's already been pre-animated by hand. Now this is not part of the simulation. So what I'm going to do is you see that the truck kind of is going to blast through these crates right around frame 20. So we want the animation to stay from 3ds Max, but then the simulations to start at frame 20. So what I can do here is get the truck selection. That's all the objects in the truck. And then what I can do is, instead of being a dynamic rigid body or a static rigid body, I'm going to make this a kinematic rigid body, which means that it's actually got keyframes that were done inside of 3ds Max. But then if I bring up the Mass Effects toolbar here and come over to our edit dialog, this allows you to edit multiple objects that are selected in mass. So here I'm going to say that this is in fact a kinematic rigid body, but I want it to be kinematic until frame 20, where the simulation will then take over. And remember that our crates actually started to fall on frame 0, so I kind of want to do the same thing for those. So the crates now are going to be, I've got all the crates selected. I want those to be kinematic rigid bodies to just sit there basically until frame 20 as well. And now when I run the simulation, you're going to see a lot more action in our scene. Oops, let me hit play on that. So the truck comes along, everything sits still, and then at frame 20 we get everything gets kind of blasting apart. And to make this a little bit more realistic, what I can do is rewind it. I'm going to have the crates selected, and I'm going to take advantage of these things called physical material attributes. So what I can do, oops, let me reselect my crates. I can come over here into the physical material, and again I'm under the edit tab, which allows mass editing of multiple objects. It's basically like editing all of the modifier stacks for these objects at one time. So what I'm going to do is use a preset for this, and I'll say cardboard is not a bad preset for these crates, and I can edit these and make my own presets if I want to. What I can also do is go to the truck itself with all the metal that's on it and say that this is going to be a steel preset. So now our simulation is a little more accurate to the real world. We've modeled this scene to scale, and as the truck comes through, we're going to kind of blast through these crates. You can see them getting really knocked apart. And then once I rewind the simulation, what we can then do is go over to our tools category and actually bake this out. So this will only take about 30 seconds. I'm going to pause the recording and come back right as this finishes up. Okay, so that was actually faster than 30 seconds, but not bad playback. So now that we've got this baked into our scene, we can close down our Mass Effects toolbar and optionally both of the toolbars. And now when we hit playback on our regular Max timeline, you can see that we've got this really fast playback in our scene, and all of those keyframes have been baked into our actual keyframes. So that's the Mass Effects toolbar for rigid body dynamics, now found out of the box in 3ds Max 2012. In this portion of the video, we're going to take a look at the new Unwrap UVW tools that are introduced in 3ds Max 2012. And before I do that, I'd like to thank Remedy Entertainment for providing these character assets from the game Alan Wake. What I'm going to do now is just go into a scene state where the character doesn't have any UV coordinate information, and then I'm going to pop into a camera view to just kind of get in on this character specifically. So what I'm going to do is isolate this jacket component. Then I'm going to add the Unwrap UVW modifier, which is not new to this release of Max. However, what we did do in the 2012 release is we kind of re-architected the tool, as well as added some other interesting tools for the unwrapping workflow. So up here you can see that we've got our familiar tools for going into sub-object selection for vertex, edge, and face, as well as the element. We've got shrink and grow our selections, as well as ring and loop selections. Moving on down here past the peel tools, which are new, I'll get to those in a second, we have the traditional planar, cylindrical, spherical, and cubic or box mapping. We also have our old friend spline mapping down here. Some of the new things, one more thing that was good old standby is our pelt mapping, which is not a new feature to this release, but if you're not familiar with pelt mapping, it's another one to look up from recent releases of Max. However, new to the 2012 release, what we've got is one feature down here called Unfold Strip from Loop, which we'll see in a second, as well as the quick peeling methods. So what I'm going to do now is open up the UVW editor itself, and then I'm going to actually bring this on screen so you can see it. Then I'm going to show this checker pattern in the viewport. Now, as you'll notice in the view, you'll see that the texture, the UVs are kind of smearing or streaking through the side of this, and that's because we're using planar mapping. As you can see here, it's kind of projecting the texture coordinate information right across and through to the back. So the front and back of this look okay, but the sides are a little bit messed up, so to speak. So what I'm going to do now is, whoops, let me undo that set right there. What I'm going to do now is zoom out so I can see more of this. And I'm going to take advantage of this mode called peeling. So here's a quick peel, but what I'm going to do is take advantage of peel mode. Now keep your eyes over here on the left at our jacket, and when I go into peel mode, what's going to happen is immediately you get this real quick sort of an unwrap as an initial solve. And to be clear about what's going on here, I'm going to have peel mode enable as I continue to work on this. I'm going to start now to take advantage of this pinning of vertices, and I'm doing so while peel mode is enabled, and that'll make sense as I start to pull these around. So what I'm going to do is select one vertice and just pull on it, but you can see that that peel mode is happening live. It's almost like a soft selection. Now when I release the mouse, you can see that that vertice right there is actually pinned. So this is where you can start to take advantage of a few of these to just start pinning around, pulling, excuse me, pulling the UV coordinates around. And you want to be kind of careful and not use too many of these. And what I'm doing is just kind of keeping my eye both on the unwrapped UV layout here in the 2D view and also keeping an eye on the 3D view. So we've got our pins enabled, and what we can also do is things like separate out our shoulder area right here. I'm just going to do a point-to-point seam from shortest distance between that point and that point, which is in this case a straight line. And then you can see that that break is right there. Well, what I could also do then is use the break tool to actually get that thing separated out. Now it looks like there's a little bit of overlap in there, so once again I'm going to just take advantage of our pinning tools and kind of stretch that out to get our nice UV coordinates over there. So that's one quick way of taking advantage of the peeling and pinning. If I exit isolation mode, I'm going to move on down to our characters. Well, first I'm going to move to our characters. Let me get out of subobject mode here real quick. I'm going to go on to this little piece of geometry right here and isolate it. It's just kind of a drawstring. Now, if I trash the UVW modifier on there and start from scratch, what I can do is say unwrap UVW, and if I bring up the dialog using the Open UV editor, once again it's appearing off screen, and so I'll bring it over so you can see it. I'm going to show the checker pattern in the viewport, and you can see that this mapping isn't quite how we want it. It's not following the contours of this actual shape. So in this case, what I could do is instead of using the pelting or the peeling, I could just select one edge and then select an edge loop very easily using this loop XY edges. So you got the whole loop, edge loop down the side of this. Then I'm going to scroll down to the tool which I mentioned a moment ago called Unfold Strip from Loop. And as soon as I click this button, you can see that we've got nice UV mapping across there. And if I just go ahead and look at this, and let's select the entire polygon element here using this select by element, what you can do now is actually say pack this down into 1 by 1 UV space so you can see that we've got nice UVs following that contour. And then as an option, what we could do is just scale this up or down depending on how much tiling we wanted to have repeating across that particular piece of geometry. That's a real quick look at that. Next step, moving along real quickly here, we can go to the pants. And what I'm going to do here is, and then once again, let me get out of sub-object mode there. If I isolate these pants, and then I'm going to take a look at this unwrap UVW. Now a little bit of work was done ahead of time in this particular example so that we can move on to a couple of newer features. Once again, I'm going to bring up the editor. And now what you can see is we've got sort of sets of different pieces of this character's geometry around. Here's the pants over here. What I could do, whoops, and let me undo that. I don't want to select by element here. So what I want to do is say, let's select these two pant legs. I'm going to scale those proportionately together, and then I'm going to group those together and give these a rescale priority of 1, which is the default. So that'll be the most priority. These pieces right here are the tops of shoes, and I'm going to just take advantage of a quick rotate here in the top quick transform dialog, and then I'm going to select both of these entities and just really quickly scale those together. And now I'm going to select those both and group those together and maybe give those a lesser scale priority of about 0.75. Now lastly, what I can do is move on to these shoe segments, but what I'm going to first do before I just start scaling these together is actually join these together and say that this piece of the shoe and this piece of the shoe actually should be stitched. So if I stitch those two together, whoops, and I forgot one thing before I do that, I'm going to actually select all three of these and once again use this rescale elements. So these are scaled proportionately together, proportionate to the other groups as well, as you can see. But now that these are proportionately scaled together, now I can go back and actually stitch these together. And once I've got those two pieces stitched together, I'll stitch these together. And what's happening is it's finding common edges rather across these two pieces of selected geometry. So I'll select all three of these, scale them proportionate, select these two, quick stitch them together, select the resulting one and the last piece, stitch those together, and now we've got our shoe set. Maybe I'll do another quick rotation on these. Oops, my cursor's being a little bit weird with the capture software. Quick rotate those two into place, select them both. I'm going to group these and give them a very low scale priority because they're the bottoms of his shoes. And now once I select everything, I can say rescale proportionately to one another according to the rescale priority, and then pack these down into our one-to-one UV space. So as you can see now, as I show the checker in the viewport and we zoom into our UV scaling, we've got a proportionate scaling, and you can still come through and fix this, you know, according to however you see fit to make up for lost texture resolution. But you're going to have a really nice workflow with using quick peel, pinning, as well as grouping with scale priority. So that's just the tip of the iceberg of the new Unwrap UVW tools. This is going to be one that helps everybody doing texture mapping of organic shape, such as characters. Irae is a new renderer that's included with every release of 3ds Max 2012, and there's a lot of talk on the internet. This is a really exciting release because of Irae. When to use Irae specifically is when you want realism. This is primarily what Irae was invented to do. It's designed for realistic renders, and that's it. Some of the things that we will get to that touch upon this include working with real-world photometric values and real-world scale, and we'll see that in a moment. Another reason when you might want to use Irae is tight deadlines, because Irae has the option to use the GPU, or graphics processing unit, of accelerated video cards to accelerate your rendering on hardware. So as opposed to something like the Scanline or MentalRay, which are software renderers, both Quicksilver and Irae have the option to use NVIDIA hardware to accelerate your renderings on the GPU. And another interesting thing that you'll see in a moment is that you define how long things will take to render. Another reason to use Irae, even if you don't have GPU hardware acceleration, is that it's very simple to use. It's really simple to set up renders. There's a lot less learning curve to it, so it's great for new users. And this is an excellent option and opportunity for people to do 3D renderings in 3ds Max that might not otherwise be full-time 3ds Max artists. So, you know, those people that might be using imported models from other applications and they just need to make a pretty picture, Irae is going to be a phenomenal use of that. Some of the benefits of Irae, as we mentioned, GPU acceleration. This is going to be one that is really phenomenal, and you wouldn't believe how accelerated some of this can be. The primary caveat here is that your scene and textures must fit into the graphics card memory for this acceleration to work. So, you know, gigantic scenes with billions of polygons probably aren't going to benefit from GPU hardware acceleration. However, you can still use Irae to render these. So CPU renders are still A-OK. So don't go throwing out your old machines without, you know, $1,000 plus video cards in them. They'll be able to take advantage of Irae as well. At Autodesk, we're calling Irae a point-and-shoot renderer. So if you follow the rules, which I'll show you on the next slide, if you follow the rules, your renders will look like photos. Another thing is known render times, which you'll see in a moment, and I'll elaborate on that again a little bit more. And another one that something that bothers a lot of new users to MentalRay is Final Gather Flicker. And if you're not familiar with all the intricacies of MentalRay, a lot of times when you do animations, especially to new users, you might get a little bit of flickering in your animation. Now that's not to say you can't get rid of it with MentalRay, but MentalRay is usually associated with longer render times because of things like Final Gather, global illumination, caustics, and so on. So Irae conditions and setup, or what I like to call the rules, there's 4 basic rules, and I'm going to kind of pop back and forth into 3ds Max now to show you how these can be set up. And these are going to be critical to the use of Irae, absolutely critical. The first is real world scale. If I jump over into 3ds Max here, you can see I've got a car scene set up, but all I want to really talk about initially is setting up your units. Now the default system unit in Max is inches. This is again is system units, which is found in this dialog right here. You can leave this alone. You really don't have to touch this. It depends on what country you're in and what type scene you're working on. I leave this to default as inches, and then my display units can be anything, whether it's US standard or metric and so on. But you want to set up a real-world scale value so that your scenes are aware of a real-world scale. Jumping back over to PowerPoint here, you want a high dynamic range environment. This can either be obtained by using a high dynamic range image with a skylight or a mental ray daylight system. And then the other option here for photometric lighting is for man-made lights, you want to use photometric lights. So let's take a look at where those are. For man-made lighting, what you're going to want to do is come over into the lights category, and then there's a type of rollout. There's standard lights and there's photometric lights. Anything you use in the photometric light category is going to be useful for man-made lights, such as street lights, a lamp in your living room, or anything that's man-made. For natural lighting or Mother Nature, what you're going to want to do is say either create lights and use the photometric daylight system that's included for use with, especially useful with Mental Ray and Irae. You can use this with other renderers, but it's kind of designed for use with Mental Ray and Irae. And then the other option is what I'm doing here is I have a skylight in my scene, which is in fact found under the standard type of lights for skylight. And if I just dropped one out there, you can see that there's an option here that says use the scene environment. So that's going to be another option that you can use. And in the environment rollout here, you can see that I have a .hdr map in my environment slot. So that's a cubic environment map, a spherical environment map that's going to be actually lighting this scene. Jumping back over into PowerPoint here, the next one down is to use the Mental Ray photographic exposure controls, and to use the thumbnail for test renders and exposure value for real world settings. We already have that dialog up right here. It's under exposure control. You're going to want to use this Mental Ray photographic exposure control, as I said, and then these presets down here allow you to actually use presets or real world values. The presets are nice, easy templates for doing things like indoor, outdoor, day and night, and so on. But what I've set this up to use is real world photographic exposure. So I'm at 1/60th of a second shutter speed, aperture of f2.28, and my ISO or film speed is at 400. So this is a nice, quick setup for real world cameras. So again, Irae is based on the real world, and this is a way that you can input exposure for your real world camera. The next and last condition or rule that you want to follow when setting up Irae pertains to materials, and specifically you want to either focus on the use of the Arch and Design shader. That's preferred, and it's probably slightly faster. However, it's a little bit more complicated than the Autodesk material library, and these are all based on, once again, real world map scale. And if I hop back over into 3ds Max, I can show you that if we open up our material editor, I'm just going to use the compact material editor in this case. What we can see is obviously the Arch and Design shader. The Arch and Design shader is going to be maybe more for advanced users, but it gets down all the nitty-gritty of advanced shader design, and you can really think of the Arch and Design shader as your go-to for most any need. However, what we've also got in the previous release of Max we added are over 1,200 new shaders. So instead of the Arch and Design shader, what we could do is drill this down to the Autodesk material library, and here you can see we've got a whole host of different types, and we could say let's go into a category called metal, and there's a subcategory of aluminum, and let's maybe get anodized light gray aluminum. So these shaders here, these Autodesk materials, one thing that's really nice about these is that they're consistent across multiple Autodesk applications, including 3ds Max, 3ds Max Design, Inventor, Revit, and AutoCAD. So all these files can be exchanged between these products, and you're going to have this consistent material library across all of those. They're also really easy to use. They're very simple, and as you can see here, there's not a lot to edit. There's over 1,200 of them to use in your projects. And once again, this is going to be dependent on using a real-world map scale. So what that means is, let's just create our friend a teapot out here real quick. Let's just go to use our auto grid on a teapot. If I create a new teapot, as you can see here, there's an option for using real-world map size. And if it's not a primitive object, if you're going to be using mapping coordinates in something like the UVW map or modifier, So if I said, let's go apply some kind of mapping coordinate information on this, there's an option here for real world map scale. So that's going to be critical for doing things for use with Irae. Everything's based on the real world. The lighting, the materials, and the renderer are all based on the real world. So let's see how this works in action. What I've done here ahead of time of this recording is I already went ahead and rendered a preview window, and this is under your environment and effects. This is not a new feature. However, this preview window is really great because it allows you to dial things up and down like the exposure, and that's what your render is going to look like right there. Now, if I jump over to our render dialog, this is where you set what renderer you want to be Irae. I've put it up at the top here, but by default it's in the bottom of the Common tab. If I come over to here and say Irae as our renderer, what I can then do is go into the Irae renderer settings, and you can see here that's very simple. There's not a lot to it. And what we've done here is defined how long do we want a render to take. So I've said I want a render to happen in 1 minute. Now as I click the render button, Irae is going to fire off, and let me actually move the frame buffer into the view so you can see it. This is actually the last rendering I just did. The one I'm about to do will take 1 minute. It'll be slightly darker than that. It'll look just like this. But that's the point of it's one of the reasons why you want to use this exposure control, specifically the mental ray photographic exposure control, because it gives you a great quick way of doing preview test renders without doing a full off render. So right now what's happening is the scene is being translated onto the memory of the video card, and it's going to use GPU acceleration to render this out. So as it loads up, it's processing the scene, the geometry, and it's also compiling all the shaders onto the video card. And then once it starts to render, you're going to see a little bit of a difference from something like Scanline or Mental Ray, where Irae does what's called progressive refinement. So it starts out with basically a grainy image and then continues to draw, and as you'll see right here, it just popped to black. Now it's going to immediately start drawing in a frame that'll start to look sort of like a grainy beginning point. And then what you do is you work from this point, and the longer you let it render, the better it's going to look. So now you can see it pop on, and our grain is going away. It's at 9%, it's at 11%, and even in just a few seconds on a laptop, you can see that the quality of this image is going to be good. The lighting is good. It looks just like my exposure control thumbnail view over here, and that's going to be great for doing test preview renders as well as doing final renders. Now, the one little bit of advice, I'm just going to cancel that out for time's sake. One little bit of advice here: if you're going to do network rendering on using Irae across multiple machines, instead of setting up your value for time, what you're going to want to do is set up your renderer for doing what's called iterations. And this is just purging off the video card right now, and also my capture software is freaking out a little bit. So what you can do here for network rendering is change this from time, where you define minutes, hours, minutes, and seconds, to iterations, which is number of passes. And the reason for that is if you have multiple machines on your network with unmatching video cards, some of them might use hardware acceleration, some of them might not. This is a way to get a common look across all of your machines having different horsepower. So that's going to be a really important aspect of it. Just looking at some of the examples here, this was an example of an animation done by some friends over at Tractor Media, and this is an Irae animation that was rendered out. And some of the things that I'll also point out here is that there's a really nice depth of field, as you can see here. Surprisingly, Irae depth of field does not add render time. So this is something you can see here, that they've animated the depth of field. And once again, just the realism that you can attain with Irae is definitely not something reserved for just architectural design or product design. Here you can see, a photographically real snow globe that was done for their Tractor Media's Christmas card. So again, there you go. Thanks to our friends at Tractor Media for providing this. And just to close out our discussion of Irae, one of the things that you should keep in mind is that I'm jumping over now into Autodesk Composite that ships with every release of 3ds Max, and you can take those Irae renderings, such as this red car down in the lower left here, and do a lot of different things to it, like color corrections. You can do blurs, and I'm doing blurring of the depth of field. And if I even go full screen on this, you can see that I've changed the look of this Irae rendering quite a bit with just a few compositing tricks over in Autodesk Composite. So lots of different options for doing Irae renderings. And again, let me jump over here. You can see, as I just kind of thumb through a lot of these images, these are all Irae renders that were done. In most cases, these were not touched up in anything like Photoshop. These are straight out of the renderer. And what you're looking at as well are images that were created using all Arch and Design or Autodesk Materials, and as well as using the daylight system and in combination or optionally with photometric lights. So again, you can see here we've got all these great renders that are coming up right out of Irae. Very simple to use and very simple to set up, and it's a very exciting option to both seasoned users and new users alike. The last feature I'm going to get to today, due to time's sake, I mean there's just a lot of new stuff in 2012, is just a subtle little feature that's been added to Viewport Canvas. If you're not familiar with Viewport Canvas from previous releases, it's under Tools, Viewport Canvas, and what I can do right here is actually load in the original character's texture map onto this. So if I'm going to say let's load in the Minotaur texture into our base layer and create a new layer, and again, this, if you haven't seen this, this is where we can do things like paint non-destructively and turn layers on and off and change the opacity and the blending modes and do things like blurring and so on. But that's that was in the previous release, just worth mentioning. But what we've got new to this release is the ability to actually clone from, under paint behavior here, we have clone from screen, and it's a very subtle little feature, but it's pretty powerful. What I'm going to do is use the asset browser to bring up a couple of images here. So here I've got one off screen that I'll bring way over here, and it's kind of a snake skin, and then maybe one other one that I could bring up is just a different one. Let's go quite different here, maybe, oh, I don't know, this won't make much sense, but I'll use red rust. So we've got this red rust image. So these are just floating full screen up over my character here, and then what you can do is say, I'm running out of screen space here, but let's say I want to paint on a new layer and I want to clone, use the clone tool. I want to clone from screen, and then what I can do is actually hold down the Alt key and just click directly anywhere on my screen, and you can see now I'm actually painting directly on my character using this snakeskin texture. And as I right click, I'm going to save this as a PSD document because I want to have all those nice layers in there. Not a new feature there, but definitely worth mentioning. And as I orbit around my character now and continue to say, you know, let's paint on this. Whoops, let me undo that movement here. Let's zoom in on our character. What I could then do is just go back to our clone tool. It automatically loads in the PSD, and then once again I can clone from different areas of the screen. So in this case I might clone from this rust and then continue to paint over here. Clone from this image right here. You can even clone from something like Photoshop or another application that's open on, you know, another monitor. I could clone from Internet Explorer, for example, or anything that I want to. So cloning from screen is basically just a screen snapshot while you're in the clone mode and holding down the Alt key to sort of sample the image, and then you can just clone from the screen and continue to paint on the model. So again, that's going to do it for me. I definitely, there's a lot more to 2012 than the few features I had time to show you today. With that, I'll open it up to some questions, and I do want to thank you for your time today, and I highly encourage you to check out 3ds Max 2012 along with our entire suite of tools that are available for download. There's trial versions available at the Irae website, which is area.autodesk.com. Thanks.